Hello, and a very warm welcome to Crossings, the Seamus Film Festival. Crossings is a collaboration between the Center for Modern Indian Studies and Namaste Plus at the University of Göttingen, and is supported by the German Academic Exchange Service, the DAAD. As many of you would know, at Crossings we've been having weekly screening discussions of Indian documentary films from October 2021. And it does not seem so long ago that we actually launched our film series with a discussion of A Rifle and a Bag in the second week of October last year. To those of you who've been with us over the past few months over this film series, thank you for watching. It has been very exciting for me personally to program these really wonderful films and to be able to organize these very stimulating discussions around the films. And today we are very pleased to present the 15th and the final screening discussion event of the Crossings Film Festival series. We present A Bit for Bengal, a film by Dwaipayan Banerjee and Kasturi Basu. Dwaipayan and Kasturi will be in conversation with Dwaipayan Bhattacharya of JNU, Delhi, and Shudabrata Sengupta of the Rux Media Collective. A very warm welcome to all of you. A few words about the film. A Bit for Bengal is about the inexorable rise of the BJP and Hindu nationalism in West Bengal, as seen through the party's activity over two elections in West Bengal, over the Indian national elections of April to May 2019, and also the assembly elections of 2021. And the film combines historical and archival footage with a personal first-person narrative and a sense of family history and involvement in this issue. In a sense, this film kicks off our own internal festival workshop tomorrow on the 2019 national elections, which is called Visual Diaries. The Visual Diaries workshop begins tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. That's German time, that's 2:30 p.m. in India. And in fact, a portion of the film you're going to see, I think it's part two of the film. This film is included in the visual diary that Kasturi and Dwaipayan will be presenting tomorrow at our workshop. But more on this later. Let me tell you a little bit about our distinguished guests, filmmakers, and discussants. Dwaipayan Banerjee is an independent documentary filmmaker, activist, researcher based in Kolkata. An alumnus of Presidency College and Calcutta University, he is presently researching on the labor movement as a doctoral student at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Kolkata. Kasturi Basu, his partner, is an independent documentary filmmaker, activist, writer, and editor based in Kolkata. By training, she is a physicist, an alumnus of Jadavpur University, the University of Cambridge, and Rutgers University. Her award-winning debut feature-length documentary ST, Saroj Datta and His Times, has been screened widely. Dwaipayan Banerjee and Kasturi Basu are also co-founders of several independent volunteer-led collectives, most famously the People's Film Collective and Humans of Patuli. Both have been active organizers of the No Vote to BJP campaign, which you will find referenced in the film. And they have co-edited the book Towards the People's Cinema, independent documentary and its audience in India. Along with the People's Film Collective, they organize the KPFF, the Kolkata People's Film Festival. Also very pleased to introduce our discussants. Dwaipayan Bhattacharya teaches Indian politics, issues of democracy and development and methods in social sciences at the Center for Political Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University. He's written on the Indian left, politics in contemporary West Bengal, local democracy, electoral politics and social policies. He has earlier been a fellow at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Kolkata and held visiting positions at various universities abroad, including a stint with us here at CMIS at the University of Göttingen. Dwaipayan has co-edited a book on social capital, and his book Government as Practice, published by the Cambridge University Press, is a study of governance from below in India's multi-layered democracy, seen through the prism of West Bengal's long left-front rule. He is a member of the ICAS NP, which is the Mariam Tabor International Center of Advanced Studies. And Shudabrata Sengupta is an artist and a writer, a member of the Rux Media Collective, a group that combines research, historical and philosophical inquiry in contemporary art. Rux Media Collective's work has been shown internationally at exhibitions such as, and it's a long list, I just mentioned a few, Documenta 11 at Kassel, the Istanbul Biennale, Venice Biennale, Guangzhou Triennale, Sao Paulo, Sydney, and Shanghai Biennale. In 2002, Shudabrata Sengupta co-initiated Sarai, a platform for discursive partnerships between theorists, practitioners, and artists engaged in reflecting on contemporary urban spaces and cultures in South Asia at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, CSDS Delhi. He is also one of the founding editors of Kafila.org, a widely read blog comprising new dissident voices in South Asia, and is a frequent writer with political commentary and essays. He writes in contemporary journals and news magazines. On a personal note, Shuddha, as I know him, is also a colleague and collaborator from many years ago. And we worked closely together on my first film on the RSS branch, The Boy in the Branch, way back in 92, 93. So I really can't think of many better people than Shuddha Sengupta and Dwaiparan Bhattacharya to discuss this film about the rise of Hindu nationalism in Bengal. So once again, thank you all for being here with us. And let me hand this over to Dwaiparan Bhattacharya to begin the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you
Hello,
very much, Lalit. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and thanks for this opportunity to discuss this wonderful film. Thanks to Crossings for holding such a festival of thought provoking films over these weeks, and I believe it's the 15th screening of a film. So, this is a wonderful kind of collection of films that you have brought in together. Now, I begin by congratulating Doipayan and Kosturi for this film. I mean, this is a documentation of a time when probably we spent the most anxious months, and the film also ends with anxiety. So the anxiety lingers, and if one has to really think about one particular mood which runs through the film, at least for me, it was that anxiety. It has come to a certain kind of welcome conclusion with the 2021 election results, no doubt. But we don't know whether this is an interregnum or this is, prelude to something bigger. This is uh, an uncertain point of arrival, and we are going through the same circuit of anxiety now. The EP elections are looming and so on. Now, let me just point out a couple of things which I really admired in the film, and then I will go to show a couple of clippings, and then discuss those clippings from a viewer's point of view. And I deal with nuts and bolts of politics, so basically, my focus will be on the political issues, organizational, partisan political issues which were out there. Now, first of all, I really like the way you started off the film in a very intimate manner. You started with your family, with migration of your fathers. One migrated from in 1964 from uh, uh, Pakistan to India. The other migrated politically from RSS to a non-RSS person after Gandhi's assassination, and that gave a certain kind of touch of honesty to the film. It showed the kind of deep feeling that you have uh, uh, for the time, and how you were trying to locate your belonging in the city, in the cusp of past and the future. That's something which has come to me as extremely refreshing. The way you started it, and also the personal points, in the sense that how you yourselves became political activists toward the end of the film, and you decided to take part in the whole game. I mean, instead of just roaming about with the camera and the microphone, you decided to be active agents in bringing about certain kind of political resolution of the whole situation. The other thing which I really liked in the film is the social, how you captured the social fabric of North Kolkata. Especially the Marwaris, the so-called non-Bengalis of North Kolkata, and their viewpoints, their attitudes, And with this was connected, uh, I think, was this texture, the visual texture of North Calcutta. It has come really well. I mean, very few Kolkata-based documentaries can actually show North Kolkata in the way that you have shown, and I could almost smell the alleyways and the Bidden Street and so on. So I feel a little nostalgic about Calcutta all the time, but I mean, this film was refreshingly drawing me closer to the texture of the city in a manner which I admired. So these are the main things which I liked, and also you didn't want to impose yourself with a certain conclusion. You I mean, you were not overtly judgmental. You were questioning, and especially your interaction with BJP and Vishwa Hindu Parishad people. I mean, you kept asking questions rather than, sort of imposing yourself in any way. Now, I will like to share a couple of clips. The first clip that I have in mind is uh, the I mean, Rahul Sinha's clip, which I think starts from 1959. Can this be played, please?
এখন লেভেলে জানি আমি রাষ্ট্রীয় স্বয়ংসেবক সংঘের সংস্পর্শে ছোটবেলা থেকেই আসি, তার কারণ আমার পরিবারের মধ্যে রাষ্ট্রীয় স্বয়ংসেবক সংঘের একটা কানেকশন ছিল। এরপরে 80 সালে যখন ভারতীয় জনতা পার্টি প্রতিষ্ঠিত হয় মুম্বাইতে, দিল্লিতে হয়েছে, তার অধিবেশনটা মুম্বাই হয়েছে, সেখান থেকেই লাগাতার এই কাজের সাথে যুক্ত হই। আর ধীরে ধীরে একদম ওয়ার্ড থেকে শুরু করে প্রত্যেকটা পদে থেকে 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 আমি এখানে পৌঁছেছি। কোনো পদ ওভারটেক করিনি। 80 দশকের কথাই বলছি। সেই সময়তে ঘুরে ঘুরে প্রচার করতাম, লোকেরা বলতো বিজেপি এটা আবার কোন পার্টি। আমি ইন্ডিয়ার একমাত্র নেতা বিজেপি নেতা, যে রাজ্য লেভেলে থেকে কি রাষ্ট্রীয় লেভেলে থেকে যে রোজ সাকার মারে যায়, রোজ এভরিডে। এখন বললাম তো, ইন্ডিয়ার একমাত্র নেতা। কলকাতায় আছি মানে প্রমাণ হচ্ছে ওখানে আছি।
विभाग साहब एक बापा सामने हाथ सामने दो हाथ ऊपरे सामने पाए हाथू भांगा तीन।
এখানে আপনার বৈষ্ণব মাতার জাগরণ, গণেশজির জাগরণ, বজরংবলীর জাগরণ, বিভিন্ন পূজা পার্বণ। যেমন আপনার ওদের একটা গাঙর বলে একটা রাজস্থানীতে একটা উৎসব হয়, তারা একটা যাত্রা নিয়ে বেরো। বর্তমান জগতে যা কিছু হচ্ছে দেশে, এই রাজ্যের নয়, ওর মধ্যে রাজ্যেরও ঢোকে, কিন্তু মূলত দেশ, সেই বিশেষ দেশের যে বিষয় আছে সেটাকে ওরা ওই গানের মধ্যে ঢোকে। মোদিজির কথা তো ঘুরে ফিরে আসেই। আমি আজকে মোদিজি বসেছে পর থেকে যতদিন দেখেছি, কে মানে একটা পার্টিও মোদিজির নাম বাদ থাকে, একটা গাঙরও যারা গান লেখে মোদিজির থাকবে। আর সেই গানের মধ্যে যেমন এই যে অভিনন্দনের ব্যাপারটা, পাকিস্তানের বোমা আতঙ্কবাদী সমস্ত মিলিয়ে প্রচলিত হিন্দি গানটাকে মধ্যে সুরটাকে ঢুকিয়ে এটা শুধু সংগঠন বললে ভুল হবে, আর শুধু ওয়েব বললে ভুল হবে। আপনার তৃণমূল কংগ্রেস এখানে ক্ষমতায় এসছে, বেশিটা ওয়েব আর কমটা হচ্ছে সংগঠন। আমাদেরও পশ্চিমবাংলায় যে আজকে উত্থানটা হতে চলেছে, সেটাও বেশিটা হচ্ছে আপনার মানে ওয়েভ, আর বাকিটা সমর্থন। থ্যাংক ইউ। না হয়ে গেছে, কোথাও রেখে
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now to come back to this is a for me it's a very important clip, because it actually shows all the contradictions that the BJP has in Bengal in certain ways. First of all, Rahul Sinha was state secretary until 2015, so this interview was taken before 2019 election. By that time, Dilip Ghosh had come in. He was feeling a little marginal within the party organization. So he had the need to assert his older connection with BJP and his intimate kind of link with RSS. Uh, 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 he had to emphasize those things in order to prove himself as one of the most authentic BJP leaders. Because you know that in Bengal, what would happen that new leaders will come from other political parties, and many of these leaders who actually were responsible for building BJP in Bengal, they were getting increasingly sidelined. So this is one contradiction which was coming through his emphasis actually. Second, the most important thing that he said was about this wave and organization, right? He was right in saying that Trinamool was more wave in 2011 when it came to power. It didn't have the kind of organizational edifice the way the left had, but still it managed to win the state and so on. Now, what he was referring to was a state election, and he was comparing that election to a parliamentary election. And indeed, in 2019 parliamentary election, there was a wave. But this wave, and this wave had reasons. We will see in another clip. But this wave was centering around Narendra Modi. It wasn't centering around BJP as a party. Now, as a result, BJP did so exceedingly well in Bengal in 2019. But when it comes to state election, it's not Modi, it's the BJP. And BJP didn't have a face in 2021. On the other hand, its rival Mamata was the face in Bengal. And I will never forget those huge hoardings where it will splash out Mamata's face and say, Bangla nijer meke chai. Bengal wants its own daughter. That played a critical role in differentiating the parliamentary from the state election. And this is a role that is played by the federal structure of our country. BJP lost many states. BJP lost Tamil Nadu. BJP, vote share went down in Assam in those elections. BJP lost Kerala, Bengal, and so on. So you see, even now they are on a tight spot in Uttar Pradesh, and so on. So I think these contradictions are coming through well in this interview. The other thing which is also interesting, all the festivals that he mentions, these are introduced in Bengal after 2014. You yourself have, you yourself commented on Ram Navami. These were not, central Bangali festivals. And he doesn't mention a single Bangali festival, so to say. Now, BJP's identification with the upcountry rather than Bengal, that identification can only get reinforced by these kind of examples, which Rahul Sinha rather unwittingly, gives him. Because, he was giving this because he was under the impression in 2019 that the state level resistance doesn't matter. It is the Desh, what is happening at the Jatiyo Desh level that will ultimately determine the politics of the country. But this is where BJP was utterly wrong. And we will see that BJP's nationalism was also, I mean, not just narrow, but also single-minded. We will come to that in another clipping. So this wave and organization, even now, BJP doesn't have a solid organizational base in Bengal. Now, you mentioned that the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and the RSS shakhas, they spread all over Bengal. And there was an interview of a VHP gentleman who said that even CPM leaders sent their wives to our pujas. They themselves couldn't come, but their wives and family members came to us. That only shows that there is a kind of a segregation in the mind of the people about the political party on the one hand and the cultural religious organizations on the other. The spread of cultural and religious organizations don't by default strengthen a political party, even though the BJP would like to do that. So the kind of contradictions that we see in BJP today, a lot of people who came in are going out. There's a kind of tussle between those older BJP leaders and the new ones. Shubhendu Adhikari isn't getting the kind of attention that he thinks he deserves. Dilip Ghosh has been completely taken out of the visibility in the leadership round. So all these things actually, in a way, get encapsulated in this particular. All the signs are there, so to say, in this interview. So this is extremely, extremely important and interesting for me. Now, can we go on to Ghulam Mustafa's interview, which starts at 2010?
Can I just add
please.
a couple of points here? So one thing I would like to add to your observations is that this festival that he mentions, no, Gangor, it's a Rajasthani festival actually.
Yeah.
And North Kolkata, as you mentioned, is quite unique in the sense that in North Kolkata, there's a very heavy, division between Bengali speaking and non-Bengali speaking, and the fraction is quite big in both cases. And Gangod used to be an old festival, but its form was different. So just before this film was released, I was reading the memoir of an old lady. She happens to be the mother of one of our friends who's a filmmaker as well. So she's Renu Gorisaria. Her son is Arjun Gorisaria, who is a filmmaker friend. So Renu has written this memoir of hers. So growing up as a Rajasthani girl in North Kolkata, and so she's probably in her 80s now, late 80s probably, some middle 80s. So when she recollects how Gangor used to be celebrated when she was a girl, then she writes that it used to be a festival of little girls and ladies belonging to Rajasthani or Marwari families, and it used to be a women's affair. And it used to be more like a broto type thing, like you have broto in Bengali. So it used to be like, they would have some wishes, and the girls and women, they would celebrate it. And it was a very benign affair. It had nothing to do with the Gangor that you see in this film. So although Gangor used to exist, it's not that it didn't exist, but it was more like a very homely affair, a woman-led affair. Men didn't used to participate over there. So how they changed the structure and the whole premise of that festival also reminds us of something that the VHP guy told us, but it's not in the film because it was a long interview. He tried to tell us that we are similarly trying to change all the pujas that Bengalis used to perform. So he gave us some example. He said that Saraswati Puja, which is coming up in 2 days. So it's always like people do it in their homes in a very small way. It's not like a huge assertion or anything. So he told us that Saraswati Puja, or if you take Janmashtami, which is Lord Krishna birthday. So those festivals are celebrated in Bengal in every home in a very small way. But what's the use of all that? That's what he says. I'm quoting him. He says that what's the use of all that? unless and until we make it a public and political assertion of the Hindus, then it doesn't matter like who is celebrating what festival at home. So this is the exact template they are using not only for festivals which are originating outside Bengal, like the Gangor one you saw, but they're also doing the same operation on the other Bengali festivals. So I find a template there. So this is why we wanted to keep it, because probably Rajasthanis living in Kolkata who grew up here, even they would not identify this kind of Gangor with what they used to remember in their childhood. So that's one thing I wanted to add to your observations, and thank you very much for highlighting all those things.
Can I
Yeah.
add some?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'll just add another thing. As you all know, in Sundarban area, they have Bonu Bibi and Dokhin Rai, right? During the course of our filmmaking and research, we came to know, as people know, Dokhin Rai is a Muslim person. Like, he is a Muslim person, and Bonu Bibi is a
Tiger
deity,
goddess.
tiger goddess. Like,
Yeah.
so they have, because they have a very Dokhin has a very visible Muslim features. They have tried to make him a Hindu like. So they have chopped off his beard, have taken out his skull cap, and all those things. And I have asked VHP person that Ram is not very local to Bengal. Why don't you try Chaitanya and other Bengal specific icons and deities? What he says that, and that is the sinister part, the fact that Ram and all the iconography that they have tried so far are very, as you said, very upcountry and comes from a Aryavarta, so to say. But they might, after this, the drubbing in the election, they might try to communalize and communalize our local gods and icons. And if that they do that, then it would be a very difficult thing to kind of mobilize against. Right now, you can say we didn't had Ram Navami when we were growing up, but if they're communalizing Morubibi Dokhinrai, or so to say other Kali on something, never forget that before BJP was a kind of was strengthened, we had Hindu Shanghati, a fringe Hindutva group in West Bengal, who had popularized the notion of very violent Kali, and kind of who can take revenge against Muslims. So they have tried all that. They have tried to popularize Gopal Patha, they have tried to popularize Kali and all those things. The sinister part is they might not remain upcountry for the long run. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very important point that both of you make, because this, I mean, militarization in certain senses of religious rituals, and also making a bridge between religious associations on the one hand and political performative partisan acts on the other. Both these are simultaneously at play right now, and of course, I mean, the BJP will try to make that possible. And so, I mean, a different kind of popular intervention in this popular religions, that is also something which has to be part of political agenda of the non-communal organizations. I mean, that is something which is now extremely important. I mean, these are areas that very few really thought were worth looking at, but now they have suddenly come to prominence, and the visibility has gone up. Ram Navami is a very good example of. We never knew that Ram Navami can be I mean, so demonstrative in its sort of violent power and so on. So yeah, absolutely. And in this context, actually, it helps me to connect what Ghulam Mustafa at Nakhoda Masjid. I mean, the way he narrates the whole thing. What happened since BJP came to power. That gives a strict level wit and understanding of politics in one of the most refined manner. Let's hear Ghulam Mustafa near Nakhoda Masjid.
पश्चिम बंगाल इतना पीसफुल था कि उसको ऑल इंडिया बेस में उसको एक मॉडल बनाया जाता था, लेकिन इस 4-5 साल के अंदर बीजेपी गवर्नमेंट के आने के बाद पब्लिक का भी मोटिवेशन बहुत सा चेंजिंग होने जा रहा है। अब यहाँ पर भी अब हिंदू मुस्लिम फीलिंग, बंगाली नॉन बंगाली फीलिंग, ये तमाम चीज़ सामने आने लगा है। तो ये मतलब है कि ये देन है मोदी सरकार है। कभी गाय के नाम पर, कभी रिलीजन के नाम पर, कभी किसके नाम पर, उसको खाली लाना मकसद है। और सबसे ज़्यादा भ्रष्टाचार यही है कि मतलब व्हाट्सअप नहीं आने देगा, नहीं खबर देने देगा, इस तरह का वो अपना आदमी को, अपना पॉलिसी को सिर्फ वो सामने लाना चाहता है, या अपना अच्छा चीज़ को सब सामने लाने, लेकिन उसका जो ख़राब है वो पब्लिक के सामने लाने नहीं देना चाहता। अब वो हर तरह से
Yeah, the most important thing he said was that communalism was I mean, the most, the dirtiest possible corruption. You know, and then he gave examples of how WhatsApp was manipulated. And now we know with the New York Times report, which came out recently, that how Pegasus was used to get into WhatsApp accounts and do all sorts of dirty things before elections. Now, what I really liked in this interview, was the way he didn't singled out only Muslims. He didn't say that Muslims are scared. He said the division between Hindus and Muslims and division between Bengalis and non-Bengalis. So basically, he's hinting at all different kinds of polarizations which were taking place in Bengal, which from his perspective was on an average peaceful before. Bengal, of course, is one of the most violent states in the country. I mean, all kinds of political violence, etc., etc. No doubt about it. But this violence of a supposed permanent majority, this is something which is clearly a new phenomenon. And the way he articulated this point, and the way he said that this is the most important form of corruption. And CSDS did a survey around the election where it was shown that only 2% considered corruption an important issue among the voters. Development was the most important issue, with 33% saying development was the issue in the state election. Many thought that that TMC leaders are corrupt, but that did not prevent them from voting the TMC. So the very idea of corruption, the way corruption is perceived, and how corruption was pitted against communalism in this election, in 2021 in particular, that is something very, very important, because this was, a kind of, as you pointed out, it was a bipolar election. And this polarization between BJP and TMC happened precisely because a lot of people thought that communalism was much more dangerous than anything else. And I will recall something that PK, the election strategist, said that, I have a market of 100% electorate. The BJP has a market of 70% electorate. So, if I can get even 50% of this 70%, there's no reason why I can't win this election. Now, that's actually true in places where you have less than 20% Muslims in those constituencies. Overwhelming number of Hindus actually voted for TMC. But when Muslim percentage went up, this also CSDS data shows, went above 20%, then things started happening differently. The polarization of the Hindu votes in favor of BJP was much more pronounced than elsewhere. So these are some interesting nuggets which come through this. And the final clip that I would like to
I'm going to intervene now, Darpan, because I'd really like to get Shuddha into the discussion.
Right.
Let's hold the final clip and we'll come back to it later. So
absolutely.
I know Shuddha also would like to show us something, but Over to you, Shudha. First, if you'd like to just comment or show us something, please.
Thank you, Lalit. Thank you, Dwaipayan, Bhattacharya, and Dwaipayan and Kasturi. It is a real pleasure to watch this film, and I've enjoyed seeing the work that you've made. Lalit referred to Shoroj Dotto, which I thought was a very striking film, and this one also I've watched now several times, and each time I go to it, I find new things to think about. So thank you very much for that. One of the things that really strikes me is that despite being a documentary on a very large and pressing question, and this is a point that Dwaipayan had also mentioned, you are able to present us with very individual predicaments as well. And I think that the connect that a film makes with an audience ultimately is with each individual in that audience, and that can be done through that bridge that we make through the film with a person or with some persons. And I was very struck by some of these even cameo appearances. Of course, the story of both your families that Dwaipayan Bhattacharya has referred to, particularly the migration or the hijrat of Dwaipayan Banerjee's father, which is a story that's common to many Bengali families and where it doesn't necessarily get always talked about. But also certain other individual predicaments. Like, I was very moved by the story of the Hanuman who became I think his name is something Sharkar, if I'm not mistaken.
Nibash Sarkar.
Nibash Sharkar. And his subsequent suicide, which I think, and it's exactly at that hinge of despair and hope, because the BJP holds out a certain hope to disenfranchised, vulnerable sections of the population that if you become the Hindu we want you to become, then everything will be all right. But at the same time, the structural operations that they've set out, that they put in place, also disenfranchise sometimes those very same populations. We know that in Assam, BJP counted on the East Bengali Hindu vote. In fact, if we think about it, the Citizenship Amendment Act is to get over a problem in Assam. How to incorporate the East Bengali Hindu migrant as a citizen while simultaneously pushing out the East Bengali Muslims, the Muslim Bengali speaker in Assam. And it's the CAA has always been actually situated on this hinge: how to exclude while including. And I think you make that point quite well in your film, and it's something that I think your audience needs to really pay attention to. That the logic of Hindutva is one always of exclusion, as well as a kind of incomplete or half-hearted inclusion, where from the very inception of the project, an attempt is made to incorporate or to reach out to, let's say, lower caste communities and say that, look, you're not Hindu enough, but if you become Hindu as we say you should be, then we can do this thing together, right? And I think that your film actually touches on that as a very individual, poignant sort of way. Then also the other character that I'd like everyone to think about is the lone woman protester student of Sanskrito College in Patuli, who I think is a remarkable emergence in the film. She stands, you take a clip from news footage, she stands with a sign silently and she stands her ground. And it's from there that the Humans of Patuli project, which both of you are engaged in, actually becomes a mode of thinking about the negotiation that individuals make with their neighborhood. Which brings me back to the first chapter of your film, which you very appropriately title Home and the World, which any Bengali speaking person will know is Ghore Baire, because it's about a tension and a conflict within every home. And of course, we are referring back to Rabindranath Tagore's novel, remarkable novel in 4 first-person voices, or 3 first-person voices, which is Ghore Baire. and the tension between the Hindutva influenced leader Shondip and Nikhilesh, the sort of doubting, skeptical person, and Bimola, who constitutes the third angle of this triangle, which eroticizes politics and politicizes erotics, which I think is very much a part of the equation of how Hindutva plays out. And it's fascinating to me because that gives me a clue to thinking about something that I want to talk about. But before we do that, can I show the first clip that I want, which is from the very beginning of your film, right?
Our city was once known as the city of processions, for better or for worse. Here you can see a scene from Louis Malle's documentary, Calcutta, shot in the late 1960s. And no, these people with red flags are not from any communist party. They are followers of Shantan Dal, a religious organization taking part in a United Front rally. It seems those days even religious bodies had to turn left in our land. To many, Lenin was as much a deity as any other, whether one liked it or not. But things have changed rapidly in recent years. This is our new city. Is this our new Bengal? This film is born out of our unease with our present.
Thanks. I mean, for me, this is a fascinating introduction to the question that you raise. How old is this new Bengal? Or how new is this old Bengal? If we look at Shantan Dal, which is an organization that I'm completely fascinated by, as you rightly point out in Louis Malle's footage, and I don't think Louis Malle himself understood this, the people carrying the red flags it's emblazoned with a sign that if you don't look at it carefully, you think is a hammer and sickle. But it's not. It is a trishul, right? Which was the sign of the Shantan Dal. And the Shantan Dal connects to another past before it as well, of the Hindutva efflorescence of the late 19th century and the early 20th century in Bengal. And the reason I'm saying this is that and I think your film punctures that slightly smug confidence that many of us Bengalis have, that we are not contaminated by this virus, this is a new thing. Your film allows us a pathway to rethink this question. Because if we scratch the surface of Bengali political culture or cultural politics, we realize very clearly that even the word Hindutva is more or less a gift of 19th century Bengal to India. Because, I mean, there's an earlier iteration of Hindutva in the late 1880s in a small article in Kesari by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, which is fascinating for different reasons. But Hindutva as a word, which is a compound word and a difficult word because the word Hindu actually has no provenance in Sanskrit. It doesn't exist in Sanskrit. Hindutva apologists are always trying to dance around this problem of the absent Hindu in the Hindu scriptural tradition. But Hindutva is a gift of Chandranath Boshu in 1892, who who writes this text called Hindu Prakritik Itihash, the fascinating title, The Natural History of the Hindus. In the late 1880s are a time of intense polarization, if you like. It's a time of intense assertion of an orthodox, revanchist, Hindu fundamentalist piety, which is also distinctly political. It gets washed away. It keeps coming back. It gets washed away. People like Rabindranath, when he writes Ghore Baire or Gora previously to that, really takes this problem head on and shows us how you can't be a Hindu fundamentalist and a humanist at the same time, right? He produces that contradiction, which I think is one of the reasons why there are people like both of you, why Doipayan's father becomes who he is, or why that lone woman protester from the Sanskrita College in Patuli is doing what she's doing, which is, and it was wonderful to see in the footage of your film when there's a no vote to BJP rally, there are all these people carrying red flags with faces on them. So there's Tagore, there's Michael Madhusudan Datto, there's Bidyasagor, there's Ram Mohan Roy, there's all sorts of characters who are part of this tension between Hindutva's origin and inception in Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, in Radhakanto Deb, in Chandranath Bosu, in Krishanna Mohan Sen, and there's a whole host of characters. Vivekananda has a kind of ambiguous position. He's neither here nor there, and can be claimed legitimately by both. But I think that this takes us to the heart of the problem, which is that even a political culture like Bengal is actually deeply imbued with a parochial, particularist, and deeply hateful assertion of political Hinduism. I mean, nowadays, in the last few days, another Bengali has been in the conversation a great deal, which is Subhash Chandra Bosu, and he is held up occasionally by our left secular intelligentsia as a kind of bulwark of secularism against the communalism of the Hindu Mahasabha. Well, that's yes and no, right? Because even Bose in 1928 leads a movement to forcibly institute actually Saraswati Pujo. It's interesting that you talked about it, which was a domestic festival, but he forces non-Hindu or non-idolatrous institutions to conduct idolatrous worship. It's very similar to what's happening in Madhya Pradesh right now, where the Bajrang Dal goes into Christian institutions and says, you have to install an icon of Saraswati. So it's, again, you can draw the line back to Bengal. Bose patronizes a character called Shotindranath Sen, who leads what is called the Potuakhali Satyagraha in East Bengal, in Bakarganj, precisely on this question of processions and music and who is going to carry an image and where will it pass through in Hindu assertion. So it's complicated to say that even a character like Bose, who can be staunchly secular at one end of his political spectrum, can also be something quite different, right? So this split in the Bengali cultural consciousness, which is something that Bengalis are embarrassed by and don't want to think about, and avoid reflection on, is part of the reason why Hindu fundamentalism or Hindutva fascism can rear its head again, right? I mean, let's not forget that the only two provinces in undivided India where the All India Hindu Mahasabha had actually a place in government was Sindh and Bengal. And characters like Shama Prasad Mukherjee or N.C. Chatterjee went on to become the prominent articulators of this position and then occupied a stage in national politics, which is why the BJP is what the BJP is today. So your film allows us, I think, an opportunity to think this question and to address it shorn of the rhetorical simplicities of what I think is the established left liberal consensus. Because it's too easy to say, oh, amader sanskriti te eta nei. Whereas in fact, it is in our Sanskriti, it is in our culture. And your film provides us the reason to have that conversation. If I can play just the second clip that I want.
Like many of our friends, we too took part in the rally. Not just for filming, but from a strong urge of being there.
আজকে ভারতবর্ষের জাতীয় নেতারা দেশ থেকে ভাগ করেছে, তার দায়িত্ব আমরা নেব না। আমাদের বাংলা নজরুলের বাংলা, আমাদের বাংলা রবীন্দ্রনাথের বাংলা। সুতরাং এই বাংলায় তোমরা চেষ্টা করছো একটা ধর্মীয় বিভাজন সৃষ্টি করে দেশটাকে টুকরো করতে, দেশটাকে ভাগ করতে, কিন্তু আমরা দেব না।
Are filmmakers supposed to be the proverbial fly on the wall? Where do flies fly when their homes are at risk? At Park Circus, one of the busiest intersections in the city, local Muslim women started an indefinite sit-in protest. These protesters were inspired by the women of Shaheen Bagh in Delhi. Soon, women-led sit-ins became contagious. These were no seasoned activists, but fresh new faces with fresh new slogans. Citizenship protests soon erupted in a few more places in Bengal, both in the city and in the countryside. But not all protests were planned in advance. In our locality, a friend stood up for a lone act of defiance.
সিএএর প্রচারে বৃহস্পতিবার পাটুলিতে দিলীপ ঘোষের অভিনন্দন যাত্রা। বিজেপির এই মিছিলে সংস্কৃত বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের পড়ুয়া সুদেষ্ণা দত্তগুপ্তর একলা প্রতিবাদ।
নরেন্দ্র মোদী যেভাবে দেশ ধর্মের ভিত্তিতে দেশ ভাগ করে চলেছে, সেখানে এনআরসি বা সেখানে আমাদের সেকুলার ইন্ডিয়া ইজ অ্যান এক্সাম্পল अगेंस्ट আমি একা ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল। This incident gave rise to a collective of neighbors in our locality. We formed a group and went knocking on every neighbor's door to share our concerns. On a few instances, we were heckled by Hindu nationalists and their supporters. Just like our friends.
I mean, I wanted to show this clip because I think that it actually produces three levels of identification: the individual, Shubeshna Dattagupta; the neighborhood, Patuli; the state, the No Vote to BJP campaign, right? And I think these three levels in which, as human beings, let's say the flies on the wall who cease to be flies on the wall, which is what you are, sort of navigate between these three levels to produce a new assertion of what solidarity can mean in today's time, right? And if I can just end by talking or showing the brief image that I sent you, Lalit. Would that be possible? You're muted. You're muted, Lalit.
Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was saying, is this the YouTube link you had sent?
No, not the YouTube link. Forget the YouTube link. Before that, I'd sent you a clip, a kind of photograph, a screen grab.
Okay, I had actually, Rohit, would you have that screen grab? I think I'd sent you the
If you don't have it, it's fine. It's not a problem. I can talk about it. It's enough to talk about.
Okay. If Rohit can reproduce it, otherwise, okay, just talk us through it.
Yeah,
I'm not-
it's just a screen grab from, I think, a friend who's known mutually to both me and Dwaipayan and Kasturi. It's Tathagato Bhattacharya, who's nowadays living in Uttarakhand, and he shows us a sticker which says "No vote to BJP," which is, but this time it's not in Bengal, but it's in Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh. So I am just mindful of the fact that just as the contagion of Hindutva spreads across time and space, beginning in Bengal, then moving to Maharashtra, Keshav Baliram Hedgewar, the founder of the RSS, actually became a Hindutva ideologue in Calcutta Medical College when he was a part of the Anushilan Samiti. And then it spreads then across India and then comes back to Bengal in kind of second and third and fourth waves. And then the resistance to that, which includes everybody from, from the young Rabindranath to Kazi Nazrul Islam to all the other, people whom we hold dear, and including then finally individuals like yourself, then do the pushback that leads to similar assertions taking place elsewhere in the country. So I am very interested to see whether the no vote to BJP tactical voting maneuver will actually work in Uttar Pradesh, just as it finally did work in West Bengal, right? And that, for me, is a note of hope. It's outside the scope of your film because obviously no vote to BJP Uttar Pradesh has just begun, and I don't know where it's going to go. But it's an interesting fact for me that what happens during your filming and with your participation in it then begins to spill out of the time of that filming and produces or begins to produce other effects. And that takes us to the very end, the credit roll sequence, where we have Moushumi, I think, singing the fourth stanza of the Indian national anthem, which is never sung, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful words of the anthem. I don't particularly like the ones we all have to sing. There's a second stanza, which is the one in which Tagore says, all the peoples who live in this land, which is Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, Jews, they're all a part of, they have a claim on this place, and more will come, which is what I think is fascinating about the NRC process, is that the NRC and the anti-NRC process, or the anti-NRC protests visualize citizenship as a fact of becoming. It's not a settled question. Because as we know, the CAA tries to settle the question of citizenship along certain date lines. So either, you come before 72 or whatever it is, you have your legacy documents. If you prove that you were here before, then you can be, or whatever. The anti-NRC protests or the anti-CAA protests envisage a future when more people and different kinds of people can claim citizenship in the union of states that is India. Right? And that, I think, takes us to two completely different ideas of what it is to be living in this country today. Is it something that where we have to trade in our purchase and our identity by proof from the past? Or is our being here a process of becoming? Which is where the darkness that Tagore talks about in the fourth stanza of Jana Gana Mana can begin to end. So I think your film, in my reading of it, in my viewing of it, takes us up and down through these many different kinds of journeys to try and make all these conversations possible. My question to you is about, I mean, obviously, it's also been a journey of self discovery for you into your family histories, into your ways in which you define yourself. And I'd like to hear a little bit about how the making of the film altered your understandings of who you were in that set of concentric circles of personhood, neighborhood, city, nation, world, the ghore baire dynamics of who each individual is in this battle between a constrictive identity and a set of opening out of the question of personhood. I'll stop there for now.
Yeah. Great. I'd love to hear Kasturi and Dwaipan respond to the many very good points Shuddha's brought up. And then I'd like to bring Dwaipan Bhattacharya in again in terms of responding to this and also showing us his next segment. Please, Dwaipan and Kasturi, please come in.
Yeah, hi. So thanks, Shuddha, for your observations. I mean, lots of streams have opened up along which we can proceed, but I think I would like to say that this to begin with the final observation. This unsung part of our national anthem. If you look at this stanza which mentions the seven religions, to which the destiny of India is still calling out, trying to bring more people in. Actually, that stanza of our very national anthem is in contradiction with the CAA, which strikes out one out of those seven religions. So we just try to, I mean, since they ask for papers, we just present to them the paper on which the poet had written down the national anthem. If that's going to remain the national anthem, then just read it, and it contradicts your own law. It's as plain as that. And this song actually we also used because this song again reincarnated itself during the anti-CA protests. Suddenly we started to sing this song again. We were not singing these stanzas of the national anthem so far. I think after the Shaheen Bagh protests started the whole array of protests all across India, suddenly this song was being sung again on the streets. And it's sort of a very emotive moment when people are singing that on the streets, saying that our anthem contradicts your act. So we are upholding our anthem against your act. So your act is actually anti national anthem. you know Turning the table around. So to come back to your concrete question, I think that you mentioned all these fault lines that were already there in the Bengali culture. And Shantandol, as like all of us know, it was present very prominently in Bankim Chandra's novel Anandamat. Anandamat, from where Bande Mataram emerges, from where the Bharat Mata, this thing emerges, has Shantandol as a very integral part of it. So when we were thinking of, we didn't want to, we wanted to keep that very much in the film, because otherwise it doesn't explain. Otherwise it becomes a very shallow understanding of what's going on. So in order to do that, we wanted to keep our fathers, and while we were interviewing our fathers, uh, we realized that if you consider his father, he was standing at one particular juncture of history where he could have gone this way or that way. He could have chosen to remain faithful to what he, as a teenager, happened to believe in. And it was probably normal as a teenager to believe in that sort of a thing, because he was seeing a lot of, communal violence in front of him. And then his shift, where it was a conscious shift, a conscious choice that he made. But he could have also not have made that choice. So, the journey bifurcates, and you take one road and you don't take the other road. As far as my own father was concerned, he mentioned to me while giving this interview that the ex-governor of Meghalaya, Tathagato Rai, who is a very hatred-spewing BJP veteran. Tathagato Rai had a very similar journey as my father. In fact, they were classmates in the engineering college. So you see another bifurcation taking place. Both of them probably, spent half of their degree they did half of their degree, engineering degree in Dhaka. And then my father moved over here, along with many of his batchmates who have the same trajectory. And Tathagata Rai happens to be in that batch. So one person takes a trajectory, the other takes the other one. And there's another bifurcation over there. So people, this sort of, the present is also pregnant with those kind of bifurcations.
Absolutely.
You can choose. I mean, that's not only, there's not one single road that you are going to travel. The present, as it leads to the future, is also pregnant with those possibilities. So those sort of thoughts were coming in our mind as we chose to keep these interviews, and the way it panned out. So as an individual, on a scale of an individual, I think at every moment we are having to make those conscious choices, kind of drawing from the past and looking into the future. So that's something we kept on realizing, even with ourselves, discovering with other friends, the choices that they're making, the sort of corrections, the self corrections they're probably making every single moment as ideas present to us. Probably Nibas Sharkar's family is also standing in such a bifurcation. We do not know what they will become in the future. Will they reflect on his death? Will they reflect on the fate of many foot soldiers of the BJP and RSS who cannot reconcile their own life with the ideas that they made a party to, right? So, on an individual level, my answer to your question is that I'll speak on the also on the community and the neighborhood level, and probably Dilpan can take over from there. So on the community level, what we found was, you see, I had a very crazy moment on the day of 12th December 2019, I think it was. I think that's the day on which, if I'm not wrong, the president signed on the CAA bill and it became an
Right.
act. So I was studying on this very room that I'm sitting now. I was just doing some work, and suddenly at 11:30 p.m., crackers start bursting outside. Okay, so we were all already very frustrated with the bill having passed into an act, and suddenly in the night, when people are going about to go to sleep, crackers are started to burst. And we live in a neighborhood which is a mixed neighborhood, like it's a Hindu Muslim mixed neighborhood. There's a mosque right behind our house. So it was very deliberate that the BJP RSS people were coming and bursting crackers over here, and I had this very crazy moment where I run out into the street, totally like crazy, and just try to tell them that you have no business bursting crackers right now in the dead of the night, and what are you bursting these crackers for, and why have you chosen this place where so many communities live. And then there was this moment where all of us in the neighborhood, they chased away those guys and they went away. So that point was a very interesting point when we thought, it came to our mind that, this neighborhood has to be there, because it's one mode of resisting. It's one mode of resisting these things. You can't only do it at an individual scale if you do not have your neighbor. I mean, there's a saying which says that, if you have to practice politics, the litmus test is whether you practice it in your neighborhood and whether you practice it at your workplace. If you're not practicing your politics in your where you live and where you work, you're probably not practicing it at all. So that was the litmus test, whether we can bring the neighborhood together during this anti-NRC and anti-CA movement. And that is when, these humans of Patuli, the clip of which you showed us, it was born, and, that kind of thing sort of took over. And I would also like to mention that, just like the RSS and the VHP guy was mentioning, that they used to run these schools on the cultural and social plane. When they run these schools, even their rival parties, they are sending their children to those very schools. So we are having a mirror image of that experience right now with the school that we have started in our community. So just before this discussion, I just came back from that school, and I'm very happy to tell you all that children from RSS and BJP families are coming to our school, and they are singing songs of Kazi Nazrul Islam. We are having discussions on, who is writing the history. We actually take in those children, and we have a history writing class. It's a project where we are writing the history of this neighborhood. So, and we are drawing our primary material from the oral histories of the grandparents of each of these kids. So, how do they remember the history of this community? So, each kid goes back to their house. They are asking their grandparents and probably elders in the community about how do they remember their history? How did they come into this place? What was this place like 70 years before or 50 years before? So doing that exercise sort of gives us a feeling of how the RSS might be feeling like when they are running their variant of neighborhood schools where they're drawing in people from maybe TNC families or CPIM families or Congress families, and they're just doing something to the children's minds, right? So it's a battle of minds also. It's a battle of consciousness, and if you resist it at the community level, beautiful things can happen, which can probably reverse some of the very things which are very very much removed from the electoral politics arena. Probably these children are not electoral, they're not party to electoral politics. They're not voters, but these are the very, this is the fertile ground on which the RSS operates. And when you look at it from the other side of the spectrum, you're trying to do something opposite to that, then you realize that it's a very fruitful probably work which gives dividends. So I'll hand over to him.
Yeah, fascinating. I would love to have Doyapa and Banerjee also comment now, and then we'll move to Doyapa and Bhattacharya and maybe show your clip, Doyapa, and then we will open it out to the audience in terms of their questions for maybe about 25 minutes. But over to you, Doyapa and Banerjee. Yeah.
So, uh, the journey that we had before the election in those 2 years of from 2019 to 2021, we could think very little as filmmakers. If we had one dominant uh, emotion, that was anxiety, we were very anxious. And when, in fact, I was editing this film and scripting this film, we were also editing and scripting videos for No Vote to BJP campaign. So it was a very it was it was a very difficult and also in a way very interesting time that we had lived through. But apart from the fact that what we have done has come out in the film, but I would like to talk about the ending of the film. And we had to think a lot about how we should end the film. The common trope of anti-fascist film is to end in some kind of optimism, that even if there is no cause of optimism, we would say that there are secular people and India is a secular country and good people will eventually defeat the bad people. And that's the usual way of ending an anti-fascist film. But we were certain that we shouldn't be ending our film this way. That would be a very disservice to the experience that we have gone through as a person and also as a filmmaker. So if you watch the ending of a film, it doesn't end with optimism. It ends with doubt, self-doubt, and also the fact that Bengal is not safe now, even though electorally BJP is in a very bad condition, but also the fact that our past had a lot to do with where we ended up in the first place. Like we ended up in this more or less saffronized Bengal, at least in 2021, because we had a past, as you said, of a long past of Hindu nationalist politics starting from 19th century onwards. And the fact that, as Joa Chatterjee has mentioned in her book, that after the independence, Hindu Bengalis could have gone either way. We had a series of riots, not only in East Pakistan but also in West Bengal that time. And the fact that Shantandal sided with the left front or the United Front had a lot to do with the fact that United Front became the champion of the Hindu refugee movement at that time, and Shantandal being the predominantly being the organization of Hindu refugees from East Pakistan, they had no choice but to side with the United Front at that time. So the Hindu refugee movement, which kind of strengthened left in West Bengal, could have gone either way. As Kasturi was saying, that everybody had a choice to make, at that time, like my father did, like Kasturi's father did. Hindu refugee had a choice to make, and somehow, for the I don't know, for like because of the history played out that way, they sided with the left with all the faults that left had at that time and later, but that saved us at least momentarily from the kind of things that could have happened at that time. So we didn't want to end the film with the hope that naturally this kind of films ends with. Yeah.
I'd like to bring in Doiparam Bhattacharya to this discussion. Doiparam, would you like to comment on some of the points that have been raised by Siddha and
Yes.
by Kasturi and Doiparam?
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating points have already been raised by Shuddha and then responded by Kosturi and Duipayan. Listening to them, I was thinking that Bengal, of course, has enormous cultural and intellectual resources for communal politics. There's no doubt about it. In our families, we have seen that people who are otherwise left and liberal, when it comes to the Muslim question, there are certain kind of obstinacy, there's certain kind of rigidness. And in a common parlance in Bangla, people ask, Bangali na Musulman? Uh, Forgetting, is somebody a Bengali or a Muslim? Forgetting completely that majority of Bengalis are Muslims. So so this is there in our common sense. But having said that, one has to say that the kind of intellectual lineage of communalism in Bengal had been disrupted time and again by, of course, Tagore, early 20th century, but also left movement from 30s and 40s onwards, left cultural movement, and eventual formation of the left front for a very long time, Congress before that, and also TMC, Trinamool Congress, declared secular stance after it came to power in Bengal. So, it's very important to have that ecosystem. Without that ecosystem, your school wouldn't function. Your school wouldn't be allowed to function. Had there been a triumphant BJP in Bengal today, following the 2021 election, you wouldn't have that neighborhood. So the neighborhood operates not singularly, but it operates as part of a larger picture, and the larger picture is always more important than the neighborhood. Although I completely agree with you that activism starts with neighborhood and workplace, no doubt about it. So, and in this context, one is really struck by BJP's anti-intellectualism in Bengal. Because if you read, recent history of Bengal politics, almost everybody converts that there is a kind of a Bhadralok hegemony in Bengal politics. Mamata Banerjee also came to power after there was a kind of a shift in the gravitas of support from the Bengali intellectuals from the left to Mamata after Nandigram and Shingur. And the kind of anti-intellectualism that BJP represents now. We all will remember what Dilip Gore said before the election, that once we come to power, rogde debo. So basically, I will give them a drubbing once we come to power. So basically, this is a very ruffian version of Hindutva politics that we have seen in Bengal in the recent times. And you know, the party which could successfully prove that this is not Bengali, so to say, is the TMC. And mind you that I'm no great supporter of Mamata Banerjee or TMC, honestly. But the point is that the last shot that you showed on a screen, where Mamata says this is Bengal's victory, and mind you, Mamata carefully maintained that Bengal is not for the Bengalis alone. And that slogan, that whoever is in Bengal actually belongs to Bengal, irrespective of religion or language. That played a major role in giving a united opposition to BJP, along with the kind of civil society activism that you did, no vote to BJP, which of course the left parties did not like, because they thought that no vote to BJP was a kind of affront for the TNC. I mean, that is their problem, because that is the kind of sectarian. They didn't realize that unless BJP can be stopped right now, the left doesn't have any future in Bengal. I mean, the Bengal left can only have a future if there is no BJP in center. Because I mean, Bengal is always divided on party lines, and it's a bipolar politics all the way, between the Congress and the left, between left and TMC, and now between TMC and BJP. And people cling to a political party for sheer security, for sheer, I mean, like your school. You need a secure environment to run the school. People need a secure environment to just go out of their homes, their houses. So it's very important that people have certain kind of affiliation in order to feel secure. And that's one of the reasons why many anti-TMC votes actually migrated to BJP, because they thought that the left is in no position to stop the TMC. And there's no doubt that TMC actually organized one of the most violent elections in 2018 Panchayat elections that happened in Bengal. I mean, this was one of the most violent Bengal saw. So, I mean, having said all this, another point which I really found interesting in the film was, and this is the final thing where you see, the 2019 election was based on a wave, and this was a Modi wave. And this was happening despite all the difficulties that people faced in the face of demonetization and the botched implementation of the GST. And after 2019, this sudden lockdown, where people had to, take to the roads under the scorching sun, and all kinds of hardships, the economic hardships, the material discomfort, and the material, the kind of complete disregard for the well-being of the people that the government has shown. Now, these and the huge growth of unemployment. I mean, I think BBC has carried 7 graphs of 7 Modi years today or yesterday. I saw that, where they say that except for bank account numbers and investment in infrastructure, everything, employment, nutrition, schooling, everything has gone down. Investments for education, for health, everything has gone down during these years. So the BJP had to have a formula to win these elections, and the formula was Desh Khatre Mein Hai. And BJP's nationalism is actually nothing except anti-Pakistanism. This comes so clearly in this film. In the last small snippet of interview that I will show, this BJP voter in North Calcutta says that mudda, unemployment, inflation, all these are important muddas. But when it comes to the security of the country, and mind you, this was post-Pulwama. So when it comes to the security of the country, everything washes out. So this was the BJP's nationalism. and also in the slogans that Pakistan ko hum dikhayenge. Everything boils down to anti-Pakistanism. And of course, I mean, it was a metaphor for the Pakistanis inside the country as well as the so-called Pakistanis inside the country as well. So let us play that clip.
बेसिकली ये जो महंगाई से त्रस्त लोग और विकास मेन मुद्दा यही है। और कुल मिला के बात ये है कि अभी भी लोग इस बार जो एक जो पोलराइजेशन हुआ उसके अंदर में बंगाल में ये समझ में आ रहा है कि इस बार बीजेपी का वोट परसेंटेज काफ़ी अच्छा बढ़ेगा और बढ़ना भी चाहिए। जिस हिसाब से देख रहे हैं कि यहाँ पर जिस हिसाब से लोग कर रहे हैं उस हिसाब से इस बार बीजेपी का सीट ज़्यादा आना चाहिए।
और आपने शुरुआत में कहा कि जीएसटी और नोटबंदी एक इशू है,
इशू है,
पर उसमें
लेकिन
तो
उसमें क्या है, कुछ एक पोलराइजेशन ऐसा हो गया कि अभी जैसे अपना पुलवामा वाला जो केस आया ना उसके बाद से लोग थोड़ा सा बीजेपी के फेवर में, कुछ यहाँ का लोग जैसे
ये
कि
पूरा एरिया है,
हाँ।
लोग ट्रेडर है, हाँ, बिजनेसमैन है, छोटे और मझली बिजनेसमैन है, तो उसके ऊपर तो नोटबंदी और जीएसटी का मार पड़ा है। तो उसको लेकर कोई रिएक्शन
नहीं वैसा रिएक्शन क्यों नहीं आएगा। बात यहाँ पर देश की आ गई है, जब देश की बात आती है ना सारे मुद्दे फेल हो गए।
Self-explanatory. So, I was missing a character in the film though. That was Dilip Ghosh. I wish you had a couple of interviews with Dilip Ghosh. It would have been hilarious, actually.
Yeah, because it was election time and it was very difficult because all of these people, they were very busy in their campaigns. It was a blessing and also a curse, because I think it was a blessing because if it was not an election time, they would have carefully checked our backgrounds. We went there with our own names. We didn't fake our identity or didn't fake our names. So the reason that probably they didn't bother to check our backgrounds that well, and they gave us access to the IT cell guy or all these interviews, was probably because they were. It was a maddening time, the election, both the election times, 2019 and 21. But the curse was that once you're traveling with one candidate and one constituency, it's very difficult to go and shoot in other places. So yeah, of course it would have been nice to have some of that bruteness.
I got caught by them.
Yeah, that was this time.
So this time when I tried, like we had some footage, we have 90 hours of footage which got edited to a 70 minutes film. So we had lots of other footages. So in the 2021 election, I was trying to again went to Rahul Sinha's constituency. It was in it was something near
In the Motua constituency.
The Motua constituency, Motua Infosys constituency, and we very naively thought that we would enter the internal meeting of BJP that they had in that election, before the election. And we waited and very naively kind of, like I was in the tea stall and my the photographer friend, he had a very smallish mobile camera and he tried to pose as a BJP supporter and went into the meeting, but we were caught obviously, and then all the footages were cleaned up from our phones, and then we were hauled up and our pictures taken. So that happened. But apart from that, we were mostly safe. So that was one incident that happened during filming. But I will just add what Doiparan had said about the rise of BJP in Bengal and why that happened. One reason was obviously how 2018 Panchayat election played out, and CPIM and Congress supporters felt that both CPIM and Congress couldn't help them to sustain themselves in the village level. So, and also BJP came up with a huge truckload of money and muscle power, which is important part of village level politics. So the first people who defected from Trinamool were from Birbhum, and they were Muslims, interestingly. So the first defection from from CPIM to BJP was in Birbhum, where Muslim CPIM supporters defected to BJP. So that was one of the main reasons why, apart from other reasons, why BJP so rapidly grew in Bengal. One. Secondly, the role of RSS and VHP, which we have shown in the film, but which we couldn't show in the film, was the existing fault lines in Bengal and how BJP had used it. One fault line was obviously Motua, which has come up in the film. The other fault line was the Adivashi. Adivashi are historically are sidelined from politics of Bengal, and Bonubashi Kullan Porishad had by now had made a strong base in Adivashi areas of West Bengal. So that was one fault line. Other fault lines were obviously the North Bengal tribals, mostly Rajbangshi tribals, who have historically been critical of how they have been sidelined by the Kolkata-centric politics that we had for long. So these are the places and these are the constituencies that BJP kind of banked on: the Adivashis, the Mutuas, and the Rajbangshis, along with the RSS BJP communal organization. That's there. So that
Also, the Hindi migrant workers.
also the Hindi migrant
That's
workers.
another
The Hindi
question.
migrant workers were the first to be swayed by the BJP juggernaut, and the riots that had happened in Asansol, be it in Asansol or in Jamnagar, in other parts of the uh, Bengal, had been initiated by Hindi-speaking migrant workers mostly. So they were the first converts, so to say. They were mostly with left before 2011. They converted to TMC after TMC came to power, but they got converted to BJP through the small-scale experimental riots that Sangh Parivar had engineered in Bengal. So that was missing in the film, so I just added that.
Yeah, but an interesting change happens between 2019 and 2021 because the CSDS data, which was the survey which was done in 2021, it shows that the OBC vote for BJP deflated by 19 points, Rajbangshi by 16%, and Adivasis by 16%. So between 2019 and 2021, the shift which had occurred in 2019, you rightly point out, part of that voters were actually coming back. Either
And
I think
the ones who are coming back, if you look at the demographics of that, they're majority women, like tribal
precisely,
women.
precisely,
Hmm.
precisely, because TMC got 50% women vote.
Hmm.
I mean, this is amazing. This is I mean, fantastic statistics. And the BJP vote actually increased by 4% only among Namasudras. That is the CSDS data show. So you're right that Adivasis and Rajbangshis, OBCs, they had a certain kind of gravitational pull toward BJP in 2019, and partly because 2018 was responsible for that. But eventually they came back to TMC, I think, many of them. And of course,
When we
TMC wouldn't have done so well without women's vote.
When you say that they came back, it had a lot to do with the kind of social welfare schemes that Mamata initiated. And when
Precisely.
you say came back, basically the women of Hindi-speaking migrants and Rajbangshis and other people came back. I guess it should be
Duare
precisely.
Sarkar was effective at that point.
If I may ask a question to Dwayapur and Kasturi, I just share a lot of the views and ideas that have already been put forth, and I really found actually your use of the archive in the beginning and the weaving of personal history is very, very interesting and very well done. But I had a question about your sort of the new archive, if you like, or the election archives, in terms of documenting what was being said about Mamta or the events that actually got the TMC a lot of public sympathy. And I was wondering if you were even tempted to use some of that footage. So one, you brought about a lot of women sort of voting for Mamta, or being sympathetic, but the way sort of the BJP kind of took her on in this very insensitive way. There was, if you recall, that footage of the Prime Minister catcalling her, or even the attack on Mamta. It was not very clear what led to that injury, but whether there was any thought given that you might want to use some of that material. That's one question. A second question, not related to this, but I thought I would ask you anyway, is I was just very curious, even when you sent me the earlier cut, about how, and it's even there in your short video diary, about, this, the way you present yourself to Rahul Sinha, for instance, and what is the source of tension that happens there, in the sense when he just asks you to leave. You don't explain it in the film. I'd just like to know what transpired there. Thanks.
Thanks, Lalit. So, uh, when we were editing and scripting the film, we obviously thought of including both how Mamata was performing and also how Modi and other BJP leaders were kind of denigrating Mamata as a woman leader. And also the fact that there was this high voltage election that was happening in Nondigram between Mamata and Shubhendu Adhikari. We were very tempted. It's not that we didn't have time. We had time and we had footage by other friends. But while editing and scripting the film, we thought that it was not working that way because the third part was so focused on the civil society aspect of Bengal politics that if we again inject some kind of real politic to it, so to say, then scripting wise it was not working. Similarly, as you had earlier suggested to us about including Pulwama in the second part of our film, again we tried. Again we tried. We had some footage of that, not only the Pulwama TV footage, but people speaking about Pulwama incident, the BJP leaders speaking about Modi and other people were speaking about Pulwama in the second part. But what happened during the editing process, which is a long run process, we had 2 or 3, 4 cuts before this final cut, and we were just trying to tell the story. We are just testing the possibilities that the story had, like the various means to tell the same story, right? So we are trying out all the possibilities in the editing phase, but we couldn't. Like we have to leave out many of the footages that we thought that we could have used, but somehow we had to take a decision that this is the best that we could have come up with. That's the first part. And secondly, I had asked Rahul Sinha. I was interviewing Rahul Sinha at that time, and Rahul Sinha, interestingly, in 2007, I guess, he was show caused in BJP because of corruption charges, and he was relieved of all the official positions. And I was asking in a very benign way that in politics you have ups and downs. Look at you had this in 2007. You were you removed from all the position, then you came back and became the state's president. So just comment on that, and he got understandably very angry, and I wanted that anger because that would have worked for my film. But for that, I just waited till the end of the interview to ask him the question, and then obviously he got angry, and we wanted that anger for the film.
Okay,
Also,
I'm
we
going to.
wanted
Okay,
to,
sorry.
wanted to keep that, when you're filming, often questions are asked about, how did you get access and all that. So we let the footage, sort of play that out. For example, when you, I mean, it's not outside the film. The footage which is inside the film sort of explains or, holds a hint to how it might have played out during these interviews. And if you sort of look at the European filmmakers bit that we use, the cow protection cell, that footage, then you see that the person who's filming is inside the same car as all these people. So probably, if you are coming from as far as Europe, they'll probably perform in front of you. So if you sort of look at the two footages, you'll see that probably they were performing more in front of her because they wanted to show how much of a big cow protector they were. So we wanted to keep those hints and clues inside because it adds another layer to the film, in my opinion, that the process of filming itself, like how do you encounter these people, what do they perform in front of you, or when do they get so irritated that they'll cut you off. So those kind of things which usually remains outside, which usually goes into the NG bin, it doesn't make it to the final cut. We wanted to keep a little bit of hint of that, so that's probably why.
No, even in Lalit's film, if I may say so, in Lalit, the first film, Boy in the Branch, we can see that at least with the little boys, the kind of chemistry that you had, you could see that in the film, right? But in the second part of the issue film, in the main in the branch, when you are following all those people, when they are old enough to be either one person was became non-RSS, and other person became more staunch RSS people. So your interaction with them also, we could see that the filming became the means to convey your relationship with your characters. So we wanted to keep those bits and pieces to show that our relationship with Rahul Sinha was very fraught, and it was fraught with tensions and all that.
Sure. Sure. That I mean, thanks so much for that response. Actually, I'd like to bring Shudha in, and Shudha, if you'd just like to make some general comments, then what I thought we'd do is we'd maybe have some final comments on Doipa, and then I really want to open it out to questions from the audience. I know that they are coming in now, and there are several. Yeah, Shudha, would you like to just say a few words and then Doipa?
Thanks, Lalit. It was nice to be reminded of Boys in the Branch. Lalit and I spent a long time with young men of the RSS, and I think this question of the relationship that one begins to form, or that begins to form, is a very interesting one. I mean, I remember, because I was doing a lot of the talking to the young men. We have the key historical interview with the current head of the RSS, Mohan Bhagwat, in which he explains a game. But I think that part of it, they would always ask us. They would ask me. They would ask Lalit, the sound recordist, the cameraman, just do this. Namaste Sada Vatsale
You remember?
Janmabu. Okay? The Prata Smaran that they do. And I would say I will never do it. Right? I said, that's the one thing I won't do. I listen to everything you say. I'm not going to do this.
Right. Our
So,
team refused. Right.
yeah. But they would lash on to me because they thought कि ये लोग तो अंग्रेजी बोलने वाले, ये हिंदी बोलने वाले. This guy speaks Hindi, so we will go through him. And it was there was a moment of tension, but also a kind of, it would be very different now. But there was a kind of mutual respect. They said, okay, we understand your refusal because we also refuse to do things. Right. So that I mean, and I got quite close to some of them actually. So I mean, it's a very different film from yours because that was about, your film is about a question, whereas I think Boys in the Branch is about these human beings and their story. So you had to have that kind of chemistry with them. And they would ask questions. One of the questions that I was consistently asked is, do you know Muslim women? I said, yes, I do. Are they friends of yours? Yes. I said, yes, I do. Do you have a Muslim girlfriend? I said, that's not a question I'm going to answer. And then they said, they're really good looking, aren't they? So, I mean, this is not in the film, but it was part of the sort of chemistry of interaction. And I would say, why do you
That's
even
a
have to
big
think?
anxiety, don't you think? Like good-looking Muslims, that's a big anxiety for them.
That's a big anxiety for them because they think they're not good looking enough. One of them was very good looking, but he had a lot of anxiety about this question, right? So I think that this dynamics of what happens, because I mean, as your film shows, fascists are people. They're not from other planets. They're from inside our families. They're from inside our streets. They're in our world. So, and I think that the question of how do you begin, we've crossed the point of conversation. There may have been a conversation in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think that point has been crossed. I mean, when I was watching your film, I saw the Bajrang Dal procession. I recently saw a bit of footage where there are these men somewhere in rural Bengal carrying torchlight in their hands, and they're actually rallying for, in support of the archpriest of genocide in India at the moment, Yati Narsinghanand Saraswati. And it's fascinating to hear these Bengali voices saying, Yati Baba Jindabad. I mean, it does a different thing in your head, because we're so accustomed to this politics of genocide being as it were a NCR, Delhi NCR question. It stretches from Delhi to Saharanpur or Delhi to Mewat, right? But to suddenly see the support for a genocidal maniac evolve in rural Bengal, I mean, it shows to me that the question that your film has raised is very much alive.
Mhm.
I was also thinking about the footage of Asansol, the riots in Asansol. We know that the inspiration for that violence was Babul Supriyo, who was at that time a minister in the central government and the MP for Asansol, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And he put out really objectionable, horrifying statements. He is now a TMC leader once again, so he's come full circle. So, I mean, it's also a question for us all to think about, is that, this circulation of, I mean, is Babul Supriyo a different person now from what he was when the riots happened in Asansol? I don't think so. So I don't think it's a question just of the BJP and the TMC. And your film, by not getting into the personalities of Mamata Banerjee and so on and so forth, I think frees us from that that binary to think more broadly.
That's a great point. That's a great point, actually, Shudha. What I'm going to do now, and maybe we can, if there's time, come back for some final comments. I want to open this out to questions from the audience, and they have questions for you, Doipan and Kasturi. What I'm going to do is read the comments as well, and then ask you the questions so you can respond to them. So a lot of questions actually from my friend Julia Koch. So I'm going to read them out. She says, thanks for that film. I like the way the family and the larger problem addressed were intertwined. What struck me in particular was the parallels of Dada's rejection of RSS politics when Gandhi's death was celebrated, and the moderation effect the destruction of the university site or the statue had. So she ties up the Dada's rejection of RSS politics and the site of destruction of the statue. So her question now is, I would like to ask Dwaipayan and Kasturi about reactions they received on the film so far, if this is not the first public screening. I think, of course, you have screened the film at the film festival in Kerala and other screenings. Would you please respond? Then we'll ask the next one. There are more questions as well.
So, because of the COVID situation, so far it wasn't possible to screen the film. But only now, the situation is getting better, and the cinema halls are allowed to open with 75% capacity only this week. So we have been waiting. Actually, lots of people have been wanting to watch this. We haven't yet screened it in Kolkata, so it's probably going to happen in the coming weeks. But before this, we have only screened it in the festival in Kerala, which you mentioned. It was screened there twice. And I think a lot of people could relate to it, especially young people. A lot of them, they had been waiting to know what's going on in Bengal. So that's the big question in the minds, like, what is going on in Bengal? How can we understand the story behind? How can we sort of make sense of uh, the dynamics that's going on there? And such people, they have connected with us. They wanted us to go back again and screen among college and university students. But we also have to remember that a lot of the time period of this film's inception was also the time of COVID. And so, the screenings so far, the physical screenings have been affected by that. So we are hoping that from March onwards, the whole screening scenario will speed up, and we are we actually, look forward to people inviting or, making arrangements so that this film can be observed or watched physically in physical spaces. More than online screenings, that would be more interesting because, we can have a solid conversation with a lot of people together, right? So that's.
May I just say, I think it would be very important to have a Hindi narrative for the film, particularly because of the Uttar Pradesh elections, and it might just pick up some traction.
If anybody can help us with that, we are very open to it. We really want to do such a version.
Right. Sanjay Joshi, Cinema Resistance, I don't know, comes to mind. I just thought,
Yeah.
you helped me with the translation actually for the Boy in the Branch recently. But, yeah, that's a great suggestion. Just continuing with what Julia has some more comments, questions, reactions. One reaction is to the music. And she asks, and she says there was a lot of emotional music at the beginning, less later. I felt that was deliberate. Was it to guide the viewer through the film? So that's a comment about the music. You can respond to that. But the part that this is the substantive question, which I think is important. The part of the suicide of the Hanuman character you referred to, Nibesh, was his name Nibesh?
Nibash.
Nibash. It was at first hard to grasp. What was the motivation to put that in? It works emotionally, but there was not much material, and the suicide question was sort of left open. Would most people from the village have been affected by the new bill? And is it right that other people would also fear deportation, like Nibash? Could you comment on this? And related to this is therefore Bangladesh also constructed as a threat sometimes? Sort of intertwined.
So this particular village from which Nibash comes is a few miles from Bangladesh. It's in a place called it's in Nodia, and it's very close to the border. So as the people say in the interview, as the family members say in the interview, that in their village probably 99% of the people are migrants from Bangladesh, and most of them are Hindus by religion. So I think where the idea to put this incident into the film came when we read about the suicide incident in the papers. So this was after the elections were over. So the elections are over and BJP had won 18 seats. So there was a lot of celebration in the BJP, lots of people defecting to the BJP. Overall, it was a game changer election in 2019. And just 1 week or probably a few days after the election results, suddenly this news of this suicide comes. And this particular person is a very interesting profile, right? Because they are the same people that we are being told to fear. The Bangladeshi migrant, we are being told to fear them. The only difference is that he is not a Muslim, he is a Hindu. So let's go and probably the feeling for us was, let's go and really speak to them, like how are they affected by this new NRC and CA politics. So then suddenly this reply comes. This particular family or the villagers in general, they find no reason for hope in the CAA. I mean, they are not convinced that the CAA will save them potentially from the NRC deportation. Like Shuddho had mentioned this, right? That the whole idea is to drive a double wedge. The NRC, as we understand, is supposed to exclude, and the CAA, as they claim, is an instrument to include partially, right? That's the claim that the BJP makes. But if you carefully read the CAA, it's not going to include even the Hindus. Even they understand. Because, the moment you try to use the CAA instrument, you're driving your entire future into uncertainty, because the moment you declare that you are a foreigner seeking Indian citizenship, all your past history goes, it flies. Suppose Nibash Shorkar's family were to apply through the CAA. I'm assuming they came in really late into India. 2008. They came in the 2000s. So if they were to use the CAA instrument, let's understand, to claim Indian citizenship, they will have to fill up a form in which they will have to declare themselves as foreigners. That's the first step to claiming CAA for yourself. The moment you claim yourself as a foreigner, all your entire documents that you've been using so far is put into question. You can be called by the police for using fake documents so far. So who's going to go through that trial by fire? So these Hindu migrants from Bangladesh, they understand through their lived experience that CA is not going to save them, which is why this entire village was very, very full of anxiety because of the NRC possibility, and which we thought was a very important piece in the jigsaw puzzle. Like why, potentially, and if you see, what comes from that is that right after the 2021 elections, if you look at Bengal now, you will see that a lot of defections are happening in the Motua constituency, voter constituency. A lot of Motua leaders are now revolting and they're trying to come out of the BJP. They're sort of the revolting bunch within the BJP right now, because their own voter base is now not convinced that the CA is not going to help them in any way. It's not going to help solve their own particular problems. And I think the Nibas Sarkar incident is sort of a precursor to what's happening now in a small way, that this small family which used to play the Hanuman and very devoted BJP voters, even they at that point of time were not convinced that the CA is going to save them from NRC. So I think this is very particular to Bengal. And this I have said in many places that, the way CAA is perceived in the rest of India and the way it's perceived in Assam and Bengal are very different, very different. So here it's an instrument to woo and to, lure the Bengali migrants, the Namashudros. But the Namashudro is, slipping away from the BJP. They're realizing that this is not for them also, although it's projected as such. There's a difference between the projection and how it's coming out in reality. So I think that's the reason why we put that incident in. And also, apart from the fact that somebody who's as devoted and, in the film, we have filmed him before. So we suddenly realize when we read the papers, oh, this guy, he's committed suicide and we have filmed him. So yeah, we felt it like we have to go back to his family and talk to them to understand what happened.
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, if I can say that,
Yes.
I think the NRC process requires the making of a paper claim. And that's a very difficult thing to do for many people. Papers are, the relationship between life and papers is very fragile for the majority of the population. I mean, Nibas Sarkar's predicament is actually not very different from the Minister of State for Home Affairs in the Central Cabinet in Delhi, which is a man called Nishit Pramanik, who's an MP from Dinhata in Kuch Bihar, again adjoining, very close to Bangladesh, came very late in life. He's a young man, and he obviously his education records show that he's from Bangladesh, and then he came to India, became a kind of local BJP goon in Kuch Bihar, where a lot of violence happened. So, I mean, the fact that he's been made Minister of State for Home Affairs, which is the ministry that will administer the NRC if and when it happens, I think is a very fascinating example of this precarity of, if there were to be an NRC, Nishit Pramanik wouldn't make it.
Right. Even if you look at Biplab Deb, the Chief Minister of Tripura, he had his education in Bangladesh. He came in very late.
Yeah.
So paperwork-wise, they're not very different from Nibas Sarkar, except that they have big connections and they're big politicians. But what about the paperwork? What about what we are asked to produce? And what about why? I mean, this is a question that, why do we not find that a single BJP leader from, let's say, West Bengal or Tripura or Assam, who is Hindu and, may have come from Bangladesh, why haven't a single of them filled up the CA form? Why haven't they, stood up and said that, we are going to be the first one who's going to fill up the CA form? They can't. I mean, it's a double bind. You can't. The moment you do that, you declare yourself a foreigner. You can't remain a minister. You can't remain a citizen.
Yeah, they can cross the international border, but they can't cross the date line.
Right. Yeah. Oh, fascinating. I'm going to actually now maybe take the last question, and I think this is a very interesting question about the left in Bengal, and I'd love to bring, after you respond, Daipan and Kasturi, I really want to bring Daipan and Bhattacharya in, because I'm thinking of party society already. But, the question is that Muhammad Asim asks, don't you think that the reason BJP managed to attract voters in Bengal is because they associated themselves with the common man, be that in the name of nationalism, and the left failed to do so. Maybe in Bengal or most part of the country, the left seems to have lost the art of debating and convincing people. So this is first, if you'd like to respond, Kasturi, then I'd just like to bring Bhapan Bhattacharya.
I'm not sure about it because there is obviously a decline of left in Bengal, and there are very specific reasons to it. That left has learned no lesson from their drubbing in Shimu, Nandigram, and Valgor, and have still now, even in this election, have continued with eulogizing the policy of neoliberal land acquisition policies and all those things. Still, they think that the only thing that they claim to be left is to claim that Shimura and Nandigram was right. So they had not learned any lesson from their drubbing. One. Secondly, as we mentioned, both Doivan as and also us mentioned that in 2018, left couldn't stand up against the violence that TMC uh, done in the local body elections. That was one of the main reasons. But apart from that, I don't think that left had much role to play in, vis-a-vis the growth of BJP in West Bengal. Although left could have been more vocal against BJP, which they haven't been at all. They thought that their main enemy is TMC, and they thought that if they speak against BJP, that will polarize the votes for TMC, and should so they shied away from that. That had worked against them. Again, left in at least the social media left have been active opponent of no vote to BJP movement for whatever reason, and again in this again thinking that if we speak against BJP, that will polarize votes for TMC. So that has been a sorry thing to witness, but I would say still they were a very marginal player this time. They have faltered, but that has not played a major part in deciding which way in Bengal's politics should go. They are now a very marginal player, so to say. So I would not. I can't claim that left's role in whatever way, positive or negative, had much to do with the rise of BJP in recent past.
Doipan?
Okay, I mean, it's a very important and question, and I'm sure that it cannot be answered adequately in a very short span of time. But you see that if, of course, I mean, BJP could convince the common man, I mean, the mythical common man, they could be more persuasive than the left in this election. There's no doubt about it. You know, the left did not have a politics in this election. Trinamool had a politics. No vote to BJP had a politics. BJP had a politics, but left didn't have a politics. Left, I mean, invented this particular category called Bijamool, which doesn't exist. They tried to establish that TMC was secretively in alliance with BJP. You know, this is the kind of line that they had taken. Their, I mean, top leaders had tweeted Bijamool kind of slogans. Now, as a result, and this was completely unconvincing to the people. They didn't find it persuasive at all. Now, why? The next question is, why is it that the left lost its politics? And this had been happening for a very long time because it was running a government, and the logic of government of the left was such that it was departing every day from any kind of ideological mooring that the left might have in its everyday practice. As a result, what happened was that the younger generation, a whole lot of younger people, they were not attracted to this governmental left anymore. And that was one of the reasons why they could not create the second generation of leaders. So when the first generation of leaders got discredited with the fall of the left front, there was nobody who could actually fill up that gap. So we see the same leaders continuing, although they don't have the kind of, ethical and political power to attract public attention. So whole lot of reasons are there, but I think that in a nutshell, the left will have to reinvent itself, and probably I don't know whether that left can actually reinvent, as Doipan pointed out, that they had been defending their land acquisition policy in the name of industrialization of Bengal, although everyone knows that such industries are no solution to many of the problems that Bengal now faces. So yeah, it's a long question.
Okay,
I just
final
wanted
comments, and we are short of time. So,
one,
Kasturi Dwapal first, and then final words with Shudha. Yes.
yeah, just wanted to add one line to what Gopal was mentioning. That I think it's my feeling that the point at which the left front lost out to the TMC, if you look at that decade, that was the decade of the Gujarat model, right? That was the decade of the Gujarat model, where the model to save capitalism in India was, that which state is attracting the big capital to itself, and, automobile kind of growth, automobile factory kind of growth. We do not hear about the Gujarat model even from Modi right now, because that Gujarat model has failed to give jobs to anyone in Gujarat. So right now, from the TMC to the BJP, right now in this decade, at this part of the time that we are in, they're trying to save the system. They're trying. All of them are trying to save the system by sort of what Piketty is suggesting. Maybe that accepting that they'll not be able to give jobs to people. So at least do some sort of a redistribution of wealth. Although they are not taxing the rich, but probably they will have to in the long run if they have to save the system. But they're at least doing some sort of a redistribution politics. But the CPIM's problem in Bengal is it has not been able to even reconcile with the fact that even to save this political economy right now, the ruling classes will have to find a way to redistribute, to find a way to do this. But they're still sticking with that old decade Gujarat model, which Modi is also not speaking about at this point. So they don't have a very clear idea of what kind of political economy solution. Forget about communal politics and their take on it, but what kind of political economy solution the left would suggest if it was to come into power? What kind of a economic model they will have to do, even if they were in power? They do not have an answer to that. To stick to Singur and Nandigram and to say that it was right is to say that we want a better Gujarat model, which even Modi is not saying. I think there they have lost out. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, this is quite a sad thing that such a party with such huge number of members and such a structure and all, they can't get to this simple point that politics has passed. Its expiry date has passed. So we need to come out with a different political economy model.
Yeah, just a small addition. Just a small addition to those
Yes,
things.
and then Shudha.
Yeah, MSA means, West Bengal is one of the top states in the country. Left doesn't have any movement for cooperativization of MSMEs, which the Kerala left does. And, the alternative models are out there. They're just not picking them up.
Shudha?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to very briefly talk about another thing, which is, I mean, first of all, I think the CPIM has to be seen on its own planet. It doesn't exhaust the left. But that apart, one of the problems that the CPIM in Bengal has had consistently, and this is also applicable to many other political formations in India, is that they take a Muslim vote for granted. And which leads them into very, very difficult and painful situations which they refuse to learn from. Just as they don't learn from Shingur and Nondigram, they also don't learn from the patronizing and infantilization that the CPIM party in West Bengal specifically, it's not the same in Kerala or in other parts of the country, but in West Bengal, the CPIM is a Hindu Bhadralok party, and it treats Muslims with both Bengali-speaking Muslims as well as Urdu-speaking Muslims with a certain kind of disdain and infantilizes them and patronizes them, which is why the CPIM has always had strong Muslim leaders. You had, let's say, Saifuddin Chaudhry, whom they pushed out. You had, many others. Even today, they have people like Dr. Fuad Halim or Handan Mullah, who are strong leaders. I mean, Hannan Mullah has more purchase in Haryana and Punjab today because of his leadership of the farmers' struggle than he does in West Bengal. And they have no role to play in the party, neither Dr. Fuad Halim nor Hannan Mullah. Whom do they pick? And this is the crux of the matter. They picked and invented a politician who was a rabid thug and a communalist, which is Bhaijan Abbas Siddiqui. And they invented this party called the Indian Secular Front, which together with one Congress MLA represents the Sanjukta Morcha, the joint whatever front they had in the West Bengal Assembly. And I know for a fact because Abbas Siddiqui comes from Purfura Sharif, which is very close to where my family comes from, and many people I know that reality well. I've grown up around that. I know that many Muslims in West Bengal felt insulted by the fact that someone like Abbas Siddiqui was made to be their so-called representative. And they deliberately voted in all the, including Purfura Sharif. His brother Naushad Siddiqui won from Bhangor, which is in Howrah, I think. But many people in Muslim
Bhangor is in North 24 Parganas.
North 24 Parganas, sorry. Many people in constituencies with strong Muslim presence actually voted against the ISF. Right? So this is once again that the West Bengal CPIM just doesn't learn from being a kind of soft Hindu party. And this is a problem it has to address. It has people who can address it, but they don't get a place. Sorry.
Okay, thanks very much. We're out of time now.
Yeah. I mean, also Dalit representation and women representation in leadership. It's almost none.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Big thank you to Dwaipayan Banerjee and Kasturi Basu for this really, really important work. And to Dwaipayan Bhattacharya and to Shuddhavrata Sengupta for these really, these nuanced readings of the film and these really insightful comments. Well, this marks the formal end of the Crossings Festival series. So thanks again for being with us over this whole process. But we are not done yet. And just will make a few final announcements. As mentioned earlier, tomorrow morning, we have our own internal workshop called Visual Diaries on the visual photo essays and rough cut video diaries that were produced over the course of the 2019 Indian national elections. And this work was commissioned by ICAS MP, which is the Marian Tagore Center for Advanced Studies. It was produced by Sri Rupa Roy and myself. And this program begins at 10 a.m. In the morning tomorrow. That's German time. That's 2:30 p.m. in India. So it's an internal workshop, but I hope to see some of you there. And on Monday, the 7th of February, we actually and formally end the film festival series with 2 online panel discussions on the Indian documentary, one with a focus on teaching practices and the other on the state of the art of the Indian documentary film. So we'll be sending out these invitations very soon. Until then, once again, thank you, Kasturi and Dwaipayan and Shuddha and Dwaipayan for being here and for this really, really interesting discussion. And until then, this is goodbye from all of us here in the broadcast room and from the Crossings Festival team. Okay, bye, take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.